So Ramsey Dewey put out a video saying how the UFC rules really favor striking, and maybe in some cases quite a bit. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say before we get going here. And number one is I like and I respect Ramsey Dewey. And even though I don't agree with him all the time, and you wouldn't expect anybody to agree with anybody all the time, I generally like and respect his opinion, especially, as somebody who was a pro, whereas I only ever did amateur competition, right? It's always nice to hear from people who are your seniors. Even though we have had vastly different paths, there's some overlap in what we do, and I appreciate that. Now, the other side of what I want to say here is I don't think his video was really actually about how the UFC rules favor striking. He tied it back in at the end of the video, but most of the video was really just how the unified rules of mixed martial arts are actually just kind of stupid rules, and could seriously benefit from an overhaul. And I agree with that. In fact, I agree with a large portion of his video. My main disagreement is actually with the idea that the rules benefit strikers or striking as the action to any significant degree. And I think that we have enough data to look at to do this. Now, the numbers and everything are fairly easy to find. I will put links on the companion article on Substack. You guys know that by now. You'll be able to find where all the links are. For some of these, I actually just went and manually tabulated out the records because they didn't have aggregates, because some of these things either no longer exist or don't exist in the same format. So that being said, his primary objections were Boxing Commission, the New Jersey Boxing Commission made the rules. Therefore, it's going to have a lot of traditional boxing holdovers. That's true. Second of all, the gloves. Well, the gloves actually came in before the Boxing Commission. And while I would generally agree with his assessment, the gloves allow you to punch harder than you would normally be able to do bare knuckle, and even more so with some reckless abandon that you would not be able to do bare knuckle. I don't know that that's enough to tip the scales. And then the round format, which again actually happened before the Boxing Commission rules, and I think we have enough evidence to the counter to say that that's not really the issue. Now, also, before we get going on that, he talked for a little bit about the 12 to 6 elbow being a stupid rule. 100% agree. It is a stupid rule. I have no qualms with any of that. And the standing 8 count, again, standing 8 count is kind of dumb. And don't quote me on this. I do believe that the ABC ditched the standing 8 count in their unified rules at some point recently for boxing. But don't quote me on that. I might be wrong on that. Okay. So, like I said, the reason that I wrote these down was because I kind of want to go through them somewhat systematically. So, yes, the Boxing Commission makes the rules, and thus the rules mimic boxing, which would inherently favor striking. I don't know that that's actually true, because I actually think that the rules for boxing are kind of stupid. And again, while the gloves do allow you to, and that because that's part of the rules, the gloves do allow you to punch harder. There's actually a lot of rules that are holdovers from boxing that somewhat neuter your ability to strike as well. So you get a plus, but you also get some minuses. I don't know that that actually makes that much of a difference. I think that a lot of those rules are stupid for their own reasons, but I don't think that they inherently favor strikers in the way that he's suggesting. Now, as far as the gloves, let's see, the gloves came about in UFC 14, and that was long before they actually did, before the New Jersey Commission came in and did a thing. The New Jersey Commission came in and they started fighting under those rules in UFC 28. So a full, 14 more events, plus some of their specials and everything before you get to the commission. So the gloves were already being instituted at that point. Now, were they doing that because of the political backlash and all that? They may have been. They may have been doing it because they felt it was safer, which, yes, I 100% agree. I've done videos on this. Gloves are not safer. But generally speaking, I don't actually think the gloves are that big of a deal. There's something that I didn't write down here, but involved gloves and actually had a significant submission finish and grappling finish, and that is the Japanese promotion Shudo, which actually started a few years before UFC. Shudo, was initially kind of a gym and a style in 1985, and then 1989 became a full-on promotion, which was largely based in catch wrestling, strong style pro wrestling, involved additional kickboxing from various disciplines and whatnot. And at least in some of the Shudo, I know some of the Japanese promotions don't allow punching to the head. The ones that I've seen definitely did allow punching to the head. But the fact is that if you go through the records, and again, I didn't enumerate them here because there are so many events, but if you go on Wikipedia, and again, the link will be provided, and go and look at the results records, by and large, you have wins by submission well over wins by striking, despite the fact that they were wearing gloves. So I don't think that the gloves are as much of an advantage for strikers as it may seem on the surface. Again, this is not hard scientific data, but I think at the very least it casts doubt on the idea. Now, the next thing, and this is kind of where I'm kind of spending more of my time, is rounds. So he made the point that on average it takes a wrestler 2 minutes to get a guy down on the ground, then he's only got a minute to finish it. Well, the problem is that not only did rounds start before the New Jersey rules, wrestling has used rounds for a long time. Wrestling actually happens in 2 or 3 minute periods, depending on what level of competition and all of that. And then even if you look at more modern grappling, like submission grappling, like the IBJJF, ADCC, Polaris, EBI, and their combat jiu-jitsu, they're running between 5 and 10 minute rounds. The IBJJF, right, they take it up all the way up to 10 minute rounds for black belts, and it's 5 minutes for white belts. With combat jiu-jitsu and EBI, right, 10 minute primary round with 5 minute overtime, stuff like that, right? But you're talking like 10 minute rounds. Now, that is longer than the mixed martial art 5 minute round, but they're still working within the time frame of rounds. And there are smaller productions that do use smaller rounds. And again, if we look at Shudo, well, Shudo was using the round format from the beginning, and they were using 3 minute rounds. And again, they were still dominating by submission despite 3 minute rounds. So again, I don't think the rounds are necessarily at fault there. Now, I made a mistake here when I wrote this down. UFC 1 did actually have 5 minute rounds, but there was unlimited 5 minute rounds, so they just kind of kept going. So I'll just go ahead and do that. But there are some milestones here, right? So UFC 2, 2 through 4, unlimited time. UFC 5, they instituted 30 minute rounds. UFC 6, 30 minute rounds with a 5 minute extension. The Ultimate 95, they did 15 minutes for the quarterfinals, 18 minutes for the semifinals, and then 27 minutes for the finals. UFC 8, they went 10 minutes for the earlier preliminaries, and then 15 minutes for the mains. We'll come back to that in a second. And then UFC 21, they instituted the 5 minute rounds and the 10-point must system. And again, they did not adopt the New Jersey rules until UFC 28. So again, there were several events between them adopting rounds and the New Jersey rules. Now, I know he's not necessarily making that distinction, and I'm not trying to get a gotcha on some technicality like that. That's not what I'm saying. My point is that the round format and time limitations and everything were kind of there earlier on than is given credit. And with that being the case, we're not really seeing the rounds and the time limitations being as much of a factor as you might think. All right, so the last piece that I want to cover really is just kind of like your finish percentages, and that doesn't tell the whole picture. When you look these things up, and I did have to go and look these up kind of manually. The current UFC stats are available from aggregate like betting sites and stuff. That's easy enough. But I actually had to go through manually just to get the pre-New Jersey stats. And I had to do the same thing with Pride. I did not put Shudo on here because I just burned out on running numbers. So I don't have Shudo's percentages, but the link will be there. You can feel free to go through, and by all means, feel free to go through and check my numbers. You may have some disagreements, right? This is not a cut and dry thing, right? And before we do this, let's say this. It's mixed martial arts. You have to understand grappling. You have to understand striking. You really can't be a one-trick pony and go into it, right? It is its own thing, which already assumes that there's going to be some grappling in the striking and there's going to be some striking in the grappling. So I'm not delineating out like the guys that are wrestlers that go and tackle a guy, sit on his chest and ground and pound him. I mean, we all know ground and pound is an extremely successful strategy. It works really well. Are you counting that as grappling that happens to finish with striking, or are you counting that as striking? You can see how you can run these numbers differently. I opted for striking-based finishes versus, joint and choke, strangle, submissions finishes. And then for everything else, I'm calling them non-finishes. I know technically a decision is a finish. A draw is technically a finish. I'm meaning the fighter's finishing the fight. In my book, points, draws, everything like that is not a finish. Obviously DQs, no contests are not a finish. So everything else is a non-finish. And you can essentially ignore these, except that it's just kind of fun to see how few fighters actually finish things. So current UFC stats, about 33%, or these are rounded, but about 33% of fights end via striking. About 19% of fights end via submission, and about 48% end without a definitive finish. If you go back to the first 27 UFCs, plus the specials that kind of interrupted those, so there's a good handful, there's 40, 50 events within that realm, something like that. You have actually 44% striking-based finishes, 37% submission finishes, and 20% non-finishes. Now, some of that was they didn't institute point systems early on, so there were a lot of events that did not have decisions or even draws. In fact, the first two draws in UFC were a couple events apart. Were both Ken Shamrock draws. And then if you go down to Pride, and the reason I pulled out Pride is because Pride does not have your standard boxing round format. They would do a 10-minute round with 5-minute follow-up rounds. So again, that kind of flies in the face of the rounds idea, and that's much closer to what you see with grappling having 10-minute rounds. So it's going to be more specific to how they're already training for their own competitions. And again, you see a 36% striking finish rate, 30% submission rate, and 34% non-finish rate in Pride. So what these numbers are telling me is this is a lot more consistent than these are. Striking actually seems like it's fairly consistent, and striking had more finishes before the New Jersey rules than it does now, and than it did in Pride. Submissions have kind of gone up and down. Submissions clearly had more advantage under a looser rule set than they do now, but that advantage isn't coming at the expense of striking. That advantage is coming at the expense of the non-finishes. You'll notice that when these go up, these go down, right? The difference there, and I think that's part of the round structure thing, is because submissions just tend to take longer, that you end up having more non-finishes. Not that you would have more striking finishes or fewer striking finishes because of that. So again, I don't think that we're seeing any kind of definitive evidence that striking is getting the advantage here. I think that actually finishing the fight is getting a disadvantage from these rules, which in my opinion is a problem. So when we look at this, when we look at all this information combined, what we're really seeing then is that while you can't call it proof, it's at least enough evidence to cast doubt on the idea that the unified rules of mixed martial arts are favoring strikers. I don't think you can say that, because I think that there are enough negatives that balance out the positives in the direction of strikers. I think where you're finding that those problems is going to be submissions versus actually the ability to finish the fight. And I think that's about it. I don't think we really need to rail on too much longer on this. So yeah, I mean, look, my title is a little clickbaity, but I don't think it's that Ramsey Dewey is necessarily wrong. I think it's just that there's more math to be done than what he went through. I think his stream of logic is fine. I just think that there was more information that he was leaving on the table that casts things in a different light. And I mean, no matter what way you slice it, it really does look like striking has an advantage in mixed competition. And I didn't go through more modern Shudo rules because I know they've changed rules a few times. And it's really hard to find information on their rule changes just because they're not popular in English-speaking countries. And I don't have a good, reliable way to search Japanese language stuff. But the fact is, it really does look like there is a general advantage to striking. But when you look at the fact that wrestlers are the ones that are winning, maybe it is the combination of having that positional advantage that wrestling gives you, plus the striking, that is really doing the trick there. Everything else is kind of back end on that, or at least that's what I'm working off of. That's the assumption that I'm working off of based off of the data that we have at our availability. All right, so I'm going to finish there, and I will talk with you guys later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Share this with your friends or anybody else who might be interested in this kind of content. If you happen to be in the Metro Phoenix area, come in for a class or just stop in to say hi. We'd love to meet you. Definitely check out our socials and our website that has all of our contact information and all of the other relevant information. And more than anything, check out our Substack. Our Substack will be containing all of the links that we use to cite and reference in our videos, as well as exclusive training content that will be available for premium members. Memberships are cheap, but you can also sign up for free, and we do have articles for free, and we will have more free articles available for you. It is a fantastic platform for what we're doing here, and we hope to see you over there. So I will talk to you guys later, and look out for the next one. Good journey.